Jessica Mehta is a poet and author who turned her passion for writing into a business. But writing, she says, for her is really a healing process that's gotten her through the toughest moments in life.
A lot of the times I feel like I need to write, like truly need to write, like a person needs to breathe. I'm Jessica Mehta in Hillsboro, Oregon at the moment. I'm the author of over a dozen books, mostly poetry. I'm also a poetry editor for 3 different journals, and I'm the owner of the company Metaphor, which provides writing services to a lot of different corporations and businesses. So I was born in Southern Oregon, a town called Central Point, which is a suburb of Medford. I lived there until I was 15 and moved up to Portland and have pretty much been here off and on for the past 20+ years. Early Saturdays, before the dawn, before the morning birds, I walked the trails of Forest Park beyond the zoo, crushed the arteries of Hoyt Arboretum beneath my spreading feet, turned the fallen petals from the rose garden to shaving peels. It was there, in the darkness of Portland mornings, that I felt most alive. Before the throngs of tourists arrived and the fat pink trolley made its chortling rounds, when rabbits were still brave enough to dash between bushes and the good swings wide enough for birthing hips held a layer of night frost close as you, the one I left sleeping in the loft. I mean, I'd always written poems. Not like I do now, they were just kind of one-offs. Immediately after my master's program, I actually taught English in South Korea for a year because I did not want to be in the traditional office setting. I came back to Oregon and I was at a place where I just wanted to see like what could happen. I moved to Costa Rica for a year because it's really low cost of living. And I told myself, I'll give myself a year to make a certain amount of money as a writer or see if I can. And if that doesn't work out, then I'll go back to Oregon in the nonprofit world. While I was in Costa Rica, I also started travel writing for a local company. They didn't pay, but they paid for my transportation to all of the best sites in Costa Rica. They paid to stay at the best resorts. They paid to go to the best restaurants and do all of these activities. And I think like starting with that kind of experience, anyone is gonna want to keep being paid or comped to travel and write. And I continued writing poetry and poems continued accumulating. And then I thought, I think like there's a book inside me, as every writer thinks. I should probably get this novel down. And it was once again based on my relationship. The wrong kind of Indian. It's whoever, whether that's me or my husband. It's basically the story of how my husband and I met, starting from like the very beginning and ending at our marriage in India. I always knew that my dad was Cherokee, that I was half, that, this is my part of the family here. But I didn't really realize fully that I wasn't like everybody else because this was a small Oregon town. My dad is from Stillwell, Oklahoma. He was the youngest and his mom died in childbirth. Some of his siblings were considerably older than him. They were almost adults, and the rest were probably within 5 years. His dad couldn't handle it, didn't know what to do, so put them in Indian boarding school, and that's how he was raised. He was unhappy. He was also an alcoholic, but more of the binge drinker variety, and my mom was more of the daily type. My dad was from Oklahoma, but ended up going down to Texas. He was serving a 7-year prison sentence for armed robbery and assault, and he had been dating a girl casually beforehand, who ended up moving to Oregon and waitressing with my mom. So my dad was bored and would write this girl love letters she had no interest in receiving. So she shared them with people at work, and my mom read one of his letters and fell in love with his words and started writing in her friend's place. They wrote for 4 years. This was in the 70s, so that was pretty much the only option they had. When my dad was released to a halfway house, He had a lot of issues readjusting to life, but the biggest one was that they took their shoes at the end of the day when they had to check in. It didn't take him long to run away, and he went to a payphone and called my mom and said, "I'm leaving, they took my shoes, so I can either hitchhike to you or I'm gone. What do you want me to do?" And she said, "Well, come here." So he did. He hitchhiked barefoot to Oregon, and they were married 2 weeks later. So I do have photos of them meeting at the bus stop, and some of the photos with little notes on the back that they wrote back and forth during that time. I mean, I'm a poet, I'm a romantic, so I think it's a romantic story, and especially that it's based largely on words and letters.
This is an Oregon thunder shower.
He was never meant to be in a domestic life, which he pretty much told me. They split up when I was 14, 15 years old. He ended up moving to North Carolina. I would spend summers there when I was an undergrad, but I think he knew that something was happening. He died of hepatitis C from a prison tattoo. I'm the only person in my immediate family who has never been incarcerated. So both my mom and my sister were in and out of jail and rehab. I have written about it a lot. I think I've gotten a lot of it out. So I don't feel the desire to write about it anymore. In terms of my family, what I've been writing about most recently is my mother's death, since it's just a year ago now. But in terms of my childhood and my relationship with my mom, I think that's fully purged out of me now. I have seen quite a bit of psychologists and psychiatrists, and especially related to the research that I'm doing right now. And one of the most recent ones said, if you were someone else, if you weren't a writer, then I would recommend that you write. But clearly, this is your way of processing through the trauma. And if you haven't been writing, then you would have become psychotic a long time ago, because trauma feeds psychosis. I'm working on a project right now that will feature the poetry of incarcerated and previously incarcerated Indigenous women, which I think are voices and stories that have been silenced, and these women don't necessarily have an easily accessible platform to tell their stories. When I talk about the project and the kind of stories that are drawn out of these workshops, Indigenous people aren't surprised that Native women are incarcerated at a rate 6 times higher than their white counterparts. These kind of statistics are what need to be known and learned outside of Indigenous communities. So ultimately, this book, I'm hoping, will be used in classroom settings, in university departments, Native departments of different colleges. I'll be donating books to certain tribal schools and Native-based nonprofits, but I still know that those aren't the readers who need the book the most. So there's definitely 2 angles that I'm addressing with it. Writing poetry is free. It's freeing, but through processes like writing, your body and mind, it understands that this trauma happened, but it happened in the past, so you're no longer reacting like it's current.
I did not choose my skin or the trauma curdling rancid through my blood. We are born into creation disasters, settled war zones, armed with chance defenses, so forgive me that ivory is my weapon.